Good morning. Yesterday we had read through the paraphrase of the poem Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard by Thomas Gray. Today, first we will look at the themes. First, the theme of death. Gray's Elegy is one of the best known poems about death in all of European literature. The poem presents the reflections of an observer who, passing by a churchyard that is out in the country, stops for a moment to think about the significance of the strangers buried there. Scholars of medieval times sometimes kept human skulls on their desktops to keep themselves conscious of the fact that someday they, like the skull's former occupants, would die. From this practice, we get the phrase memento mori, which we say to this day to describe any token one uses to keep one's mortality in mind. In this poem, the graveyard acts as a memento mori, reminding the narrator to not place too much value on this life because someday he too will be dead and buried. The speaker of the poem is surrounded by the idea of death, and throughout the first 7 stanzas, there are numerous images pointing out the contrast between death and life. After mentioning the churchyard in the title, which establishes the theme of mortality, the poem itself begins with images of gloom and finality. The darkness at the end of the day, the forlorn moan of lowing cattle, the stillness of the air, highlighted by the beetle's stilted motion and the owl's nocturnal hooting, all serve to set a background for this serious meditation. However, it is not until the fourth stanza that the poem actually begins to deal with the cemetery, mentioned as the place where the village forefathers sleep. In the following stanzas, the speaker tries to imagine what the lives of these simple men might have been like, touching upon their relations with their wives, children, and the soil that they worked. They are not defined by their possessions because they had few. Instead, are defined by their actions, which serves to contrast their lives with their quiet existence in the graveyard. This elegy presents the dead in the best light. Their families adored them and they were cheerful in their work as they hummed the woods beneath their steady stroke. The speaker openly admits that they are spoken of as well precisely because they are dead. Because death is such a terrible thing that its victims deserve the respect of the living. In line 90, the poet explains, some pious drops the closing eye requires, explaining that the living should show their respect for death with their sorrow. The theme for self. The speaker in this poem goes through a process of recognizing what is important to him and choosing how to live his life, which leads to the epitaph with which he would like to be remembered. In stanza 8, the poem begins naming the attributes that are normally considered desirable, but are now considered pointless when compared with the lives of the rustic dead in the country graveyard. Ambition and grandeur, according to the speaker, should not think less of these people because of their simple accomplishments. He goes on to assert that pride and memory have no right to ignore them, and that honor and flattery will be as useless to the rich as to the poor when they are dead. The speaker, an educated person, gives much consideration to the subject of knowledge and whether the lack of it made the lives of these people less significant. Their poverty blocked the way to knowledge, he decides, and the lack of knowledge separated them from vices as well as virtues, so that in the end he does not consider his education a factor in making him better or worse than them either. In the end, having eliminated all of the supposed benefits of the wealthy, educated world that he comes from, the speaker identifies himself with the graveyard inhabitants to such a degree that he winds up in this humble graveyard after his death. In contrast to the simple graves that he pondered over throughout his life, though, the speaker's grave is marked with a warm hearted memorial, the epitaph at the end of the poem. Assuming that such a thoughtful person would not have been so immodest as to write this epitaph for himself, there must have been some other literate person to remember him. He is also remembered by an illiterate member of the farm community, the hoary headed swain, who has to ask someone to read the epitaph. Before the death of the poem's narrator, this swain established a non verbal relationship with him, observing him from afar, wondering about him just as the narrator wondered about the country people buried there. The theme of class conflict. A superficial reading of this poem might leave the impression that the author intends to present members of the lower class as being more worthy of praise than their upper class counterparts. This would be a reasonable assumption, since so much of the poem is devoted to praising the simple virtues of the poor. In the larger scope, though, the position that Gray takes is that all people, poor or rich, are equal. This is a meditation on death, which has been called the great equalizer because no one can avoid it. The reason that the poem seems to favor one class over the other is that it is working against the assumption that only those of the upper class are worthy of attention when they die. It is the humble condition of the country churchyard with gravestones unmarked or possibly marked just with names by illiterate people unable to read that draws attention to the virtues of the poor and uneducated, which society often forgets. And so much of the poem is spent praising their moral strength. The virtues of the wealthy and famous are not denied. They are not explored in this poem because they are already so familiar. Evidence of the poem's even-handedness about the different classes can be seen in the fact that, while praising the poor country people throughout, Gray also acknowledges that education, which may give them opportunity to develop moral excellence, may also lead them to corruption. As he says in stanza 17, the humble circumstances of the poor limited the growth not only of their virtues, but also of their crimes. The poem thus leaves open the question of superiority. Society glorifies the rich, and the poem's narrator glorifies the poor. But as he reminds us, the paths of glory lead but to the grave. Gray's style of writing. Elegy written in a country churchyard is written in heroic quatrains. A quatrain is a 4-line stanza. Heroic quatrains rhyme in the ABAB pattern and are written in iambic pentameter. An iamb is a poetic foot consisting of one unstressed and one stressed syllable, as in the phrase the world. Pentameter simply means that there are 5 feet in each line. Consider, for instance, the first line of Gray's Elegy written in a country churchyard. The opening line is, "The curfew tolls the knell of parting day." When we scan the line or identify its stresses, it appears as follow. The curfew tolls the knell of parting day. Try reading this line aloud. Its regular steady rhythm helps to create a calm and quiet mood, one appropriate to the meditative nature of this poem. Let us now try to analyze the poem. Thomas Gray began to compose Elegy written in a country churchyard after the death of his friend Richard West in 1742. The poem follows in a long tradition of English elegies and exemplifies the elegiac stanza form. Quatrains of iambic pentameter in the ABAB rhyme scheme. This stately and supple form suits Gray's pensive mode and captures the rolling landscape of the poem's setting. Unlike the typical elegy, Gray's poem laments a number of commoners' deaths. This choice is consonant with its democratic ethic and its suggestion that the poor deserve to be remembered as well as the rich. The poem started in 1742 after the death of Gray's friend Richard West, and it was published in 1751. An elegy, as we know, is loosely defined as a formal meditation on death and is often written to memorialize an individual, as in Milton's Lycidas. Gray's elegy, however, is a broader meditation on humankind's mortality and considers the memorialization of life and death. Gray's version of the elegy gives the name to the elegiac stanza form, which is composed of quatrains of iambic pentameter that align to an ABAB rhyme scheme. Earlier elegies in English literature include the Old English poem The Wanderer, the year is 900 CE, the Book of the Duchess, 1370, by Geoffrey Chaucer, and Lycidas, 1638, by John Milton, a pastoral poem, elegy, memorializing the loss of Milton's friend Edward King. Gray's elegy exhibits a regular meter and consists of 32 stanzas, with Gray's typically rich use of alliteration, consonants, imagery, personification, allusion, and archaisms. That is, vocabulary designed to evoke the past. The elegy was so popular that on the night before the English defeated the French at Quebec in 1759, the commander of the English forces, General James Wolfe, is reputed to have said, and I quote him, "I would rather have been the author of that piece than beat the French tomorrow." That anecdote may be apocryphal, but it does capture the poem's popularity. In stanzas 1 to 5, Gray describes the rural English landscape in his evocative depiction of the graveyard and its surrounding at close of day, beginning with a scene that would resonate with anyone familiar with rural villages in England. To quote the opening lines, "The curfew tolls the knell of parting day, the lowing herd winds slowly over the lea, the ploughman homeward plods his weary way." Each line is an encapsulated image of tranquility, and there are no enjambed lines. In other words, the thought does not continue into the next line to carry one line to the next. This is an effective way to create three distinct but related images that appeal to the senses of sound and sight. Gray makes a subtle nod to the past when William the Conqueror required a bell to be rung in each village, signaling that each householder should put out his fire and retire for the evening, a custom still followed in many rural villages in 18th century England. That is when the poem was written. Like the tolling bell in John Donne's No Man is an Island, Gray's bell connotes and symbolizes the death of an individual while enriching his depiction of pastoral life. Gray uses alliteration skillfully in the last line. "The ploughman homeward plods his weary way." This allows the line to roll gently off the tongue and mirror the rolling landscape described by the Anglo-Saxon word lea surrounding the graveyard. The diction, primarily Anglo-Saxon, enhances the depiction of an older England. An unusual element for an elegy is introduced in stanzas 8 to 18, when Gray shifts his exploration from the pastoral life of the rural villagers to the contrast between the simple rural life and the complex shallow life symbolized by attributes like ambition and grandeur that one associates with the wealthy and powerful. Gray points out that the villagers' modest lives and the lives characterized by grandeur and ambition share the same fate. And all that beauty, all that wealth ever gave, awaits alike the inevitable hour, the paths of glory. The historical context of the poem. When Thomas Gray was writing this poem, the world was going through a period of intellectual development that thinkers of the time dubbed the Age of Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was a philosophical movement that grew out of the great advances made by scientists in the 17th and 18th centuries. One key example which ended up having great influence on the Enlightenment was Sir Isaac Newton's theory of universal gravitation, which proposed laws that explained and predicted the behavior of matter in all circumstances everywhere. Newton published his theory in his book Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica in 1687, and it marked a turning point in the history of science. At the same time, this idea of the power of rationalism was growing in the area of philosophy. Thinkers such as René Descartes (1596 to 1650) and Baruch Spinoza (1632 to 1677) took up the idea of rationalism, attempting to apply the methods of scientific inquiry to the field of philosophy. Descartes' famous statement, "I think, therefore I am," represents his attempt to start with the simple truth that he could be sure of about the world, which was that he himself existed. In political science, Thomas Hobbes (1588 to 1679) explored the interrelations of social interactions in such works as The Elements of Law, Natural and Politic, and John Locke (1632 to 1704) explained human intelligence as being the sum of what is learned through experience, not the God given right of a few. By the start of the 18th century, intellectuals throughout the world were excited about the new age of enlightenment, which promised humanity new hope for controlling the world's problems. At first, though, the Enlightenment's enthusiasts were considered dangerous radicals. They rejected tradition that was not backed up with solid rational explanation, and tradition was the basis for most rulers' political power. Royalty ruled by relation to previous rulers, and landowners feasted while peasants starved because of their rights based on inheritance. But rationalism served to undermine such rights and to blur class distinctions. In particular, the Catholic Church, which had been a strong influence in European politics for centuries, was threatened by the skepticism of Enlightenment thinkers who felt society should be organized according to rational rather than religious principles. Skepticism basically means having doubts about something, not easily believing or accepting something as truth. To continue, as religious explanations of the universe lost credibility to scientific explanations that were based on observation, the church took a defensive position, jailing three freethinkers for heresy, where they published theories that contradicted church tradition. In earlier times, Galileo, for example, was imprisoned for supporting the Copernican heliocentric view of the solar system, which means that it was Galileo who told us that the sun is in the center and all the planets, including the earth, they revolve around the sun. This is known as the heliocentric view. In the early 1700s, the church clashed frequently with Enlightenment theorists who made even minor claims about the nature of man and society that could be considered heretical. By the middle of the century, when Thomas Gray wrote his Elegy, Enlightenment rationality had gained enough public support to stand on its own. To some extent, the poem displays Enlightenment principles in the way that the speaker shows faith that the rural poor could be intelligent and successful if they had proper education, reflecting Locke's theory of the mind as a blank slate that is ready to grow. The pessimism he shows, though, regarding the potential for corruption if the poor were educated, is contrary to the standard Enlightenment optimism about the good that will result from education. That's all for today. We will continue with the critical overview of the poem in the next session. Thank you.